So thank you for coming, everybody, and welcome. My name's Colleen. I work for Soil Association Scotland as the farming lead in Scotland, but I do a lot of stuff across the UK as well. The webinar tonight is part of a wider programme called Agroecology Strengthening Livelihoods. I've put a link to that in the chat if anybody wants to go and have a look if you haven't heard of it before. But it's a coalition project with 7 organisations, all of us working together with different groups right across Scotland, looking at a lot of different topics and sectors. Our one is farm woodland and agroforestry, and there's crofting, livestock grazing, market gardening, lots of different groups. So this is part of a wider thing. But as one of our webinars, a topic that comes up quite a lot as of interest to people is tree hay. So that has proved to be very popular tonight with the amount of people that have booked on and the waiting list. So welcome everybody and thank you for coming. I'm going to do just very quick housekeeping. We're going to mute everybody while the speakers are talking, and we'll have 3 speakers and then go into a discussion afterwards. The event will be recorded, so we'll start recording in a minute or 2. The toolbar, it depends if you're on the web or on the app, so whether that's at the top or the bottom, but there's a chat function for introducing yourselves, and then there's also a Q&A function, and just when there's a lot of people, it's easier to put specific questions for the speakers into the Q&A, and then we'll be able to find them and come back to them a bit easier when it's the discussion section. If anybody has a problem, pop it in the chat and we'll find it, and we'll pop some links and things in the chat as well. Anna, do you think I've forgotten anything for the housekeeping bit?
No, right? I think that you're absolutely
okay. Super. Jane, if you want to start recording now, please, and then we'll go to the agenda slide and just have a quick look through. So we've got an hour and a half, or just under an hour and a half now. So we're going to do in a second a very quick interactive poll just to get a sense of who's with us and where people are coming from, because I think this is possibly our biggest webinar booking with 250 people booking on. So we want to see where folk are coming from. And then we'll hear from our 3 speakers. We've got Dr Lindsay Whistance from Organic Research Centre. We've got James Reid from Tap and Noth Farm, and we've got Lynn Cassells from Limbra Croft. I think a lot of you might know some or all of them already, but let them introduce themselves when we go through. And then we'll have a bit of Q&A and a discussion around whatever the kind of hot topics are. So Jane, if you go to the next slide, and I don't know if people have used Menti before, but this is a kind of interactive poll. So you can either do it on your phone while you're watching this on the laptop, or you can click on the, I think Jane was going to try and put a link, I lost my mouse now, put a link in the chat so that you can click on Menti and you type in that code that's on the screen at the moment. So we'll give folk a wee second to do that. And then it goes to the first question. I think we've only got 3 questions. So give folk just a wee second to go to menti.com, either on your computer or on your phone while you're watching, and enter the code that's there. And when we go on to the next slide, the code stays at the top, so you'll be able to see it. So Jane, if you go to the next one now, and we'll hope folk have managed to join. So the first one, what are you hoping to learn today? Just to get a sense, partly for the speakers and partly just for our interest as well. What are folk interested in? More about tree hay, parasite control, different species, how to make it, nutritional benefits, which species to feed, nutrition. Yeah, there's a couple of recurring themes. So yeah, I think we'll definitely hear a bit about nutrition and making it, how to store it. That's great. Okay, so hopefully folk have managed to pop an answer in there, and we'll go to the next one. And so we've got folk from all around the UK, Poland, Netherlands, Wales. That's great. I think most folk have maybe answered. So if we go to the next slide. Oh yeah, and I'm seeing in chat a couple of people answering in chat. So if you didn't manage to get into Menti, you can also pop an answer in the chat if that's easier. So that's great. I'm seeing somebody there from Canada. And then the next one's about regenerative, nature-friendly, agroecological farming for the people who are growing, producing. And thanks, Anna, for popping the code for Menti in the chat again. And I think the Menti survey stays open so people can go back to it if we've gone a bit quick at the moment, or you can pop an answer in the chat as well. That's totally fine. That's interesting. Nobody's saying no for using some sort of regenerative, nature-friendly, agroecological. A lot of people moving towards, and a lot of people saying yes, which is a lovely thing to see an answer to. I think most people have put an answer in there, so can't remember if there's one more question or if that's it now. Oh yeah, if you've ever used trees as livestock fodder before. That's interesting. Not quite half and half, but quite a lot saying yes. So yeah, hopefully this webinar will be good, a bit of detail and see what other people are doing, how people are using it and what they're using. And then we'll have one question at the end, or a couple of questions at the end around what specifically was useful, what do you want to know more of. Super. Okay, thanks, Jane. Go to the next bit. Thank you everybody for filling in those questions. That's really useful just for us to get a kind of sense of where people are coming from, literally geographically as well as ideologically. So that's super. So we'll move on to the chat just now. If we've got Lindsay, if Jane, you stop sharing your screen, and if Lindsay, if you want to start us off, I'll let you introduce yourself and then give us a bit of a sort of overview and your experience from a kind of research point of view, all about tree hay.
Yeah, thanks very much, Colleen. I'll just get my screen up. Well, hello everyone. So many people, lots of names I recognised, plenty I don't. So really excited to be part of this webinar. Thanks very much to Soil Association Scotland for that. So I am an animal researcher, livestock researcher at the Organic Research Centre, and my main focus is really on offering animals, farmed animals, lives worth living. And as part of that, trees are really an important part of this narrative. They offer so many benefits to our livestock in the form of shade, shelter, fodder, body care, even emotional benefits. But I don't have time to talk about those today, sadly. So I'm going to be focusing on the feed element, and there's still a lot to say here. So let's get started with that. So it's worth reminding ourselves that tree fodder or browse is really an important part of their natural diet. So you can see here some work that was done with the woodland grazing toolbox, looking at cattle, horse, sheep and goats. And every year, on average, the cattle are taking in about 12% of their diet as browse. For sheep, that's around 20%. For goats, that's 60%. But you can also see that there are times of the year when this level goes up quite dramatically. So for cattle, they up to over half of their diet can be browse. It goes up to a whopping 93% for goats. And these might be times when there's very little grass available, so in a very dry season, but it also might be in the springtime where the shoots, the young leaves of the trees are very tasty. And you can see on the right-hand side of the screen some research that was done in the Netherlands, looking at time spent browsing with a group of heifers with access to a mixed hedge. So I've listed the trees that were in the hedge just above the blue table, but you can see how much more time they're spending in spring compared to early summer and late summer. And they also noted the species that they were preferring to browse on at that point. And here it's hazel, hawthorn and hornbeam. But it's important to also note that it's of the species selected. And whilst it's quite a rich hedge, it's not an exhaustive hedge in terms of species. So again, something else that was developed in the woodland grazing toolbox, looking at the levels of palatability for some species. And again, it's not an exhaustive list, but it's still very interesting to see that there's quite a range of willingness to eat plants, if you like. So aspen and willow score very highly on palatability, but consistently beech and alder score very low. That's not to say they're not palatable, but they browse much less on these species. And at this point, I also want to make clear that palatability isn't just about hedonistic senses. So we often think about it as tasty, and that is certainly a strong component of it. So mostly flavour, partly smell, but this is a really sophisticated system of feedback. It's a really important feedback mechanism that includes chemical and mechanical responses after having ingested a feed. And that partly determines how much the animal eats, how often. So it's also influenced by the health status and the nutritional status of the animal. Now, we're still learning how sophisticated these systems are. There are still quite a lot of people who don't believe that animals are capable of choosing feedstuffs that are appropriate, or as Fred Provenza in the US calls it, nutritional wisdom. But I would argue that if it's that random, it's extraordinary that they've survived this long through their evolutionary history. The challenges that we have, of course, is that we have changed the animal in terms of what we ask of them. So they may well be able to cater for themselves in a natural environment with access to all normal species in that environment. But we're asking them to produce a lot more. And we often put them into environments where many of the species have been removed. So we do have to be a little bit cautious about how much how able they are, let's say, in a modern system. But there's still surprising evidence that they are more than capable of selecting nutrients that they need, even before there is any evidence, medical evidence, that they are needing these elements. So this is a piece of research. I like to show this because it was done in 1917 and reproduced in a book from 1989. And it's really the beginning of nutritional analysis, but the end of normal practice of feeding tree fodder. So these are trees that would have been fed in Scandinavia as normal practice on farm. That's not to say that there weren't other trees that were available in this environment, but these were the trees that were allocated to feeding the livestock. And it's worth noting that not all of them are particularly palatable, so they've got older in there. And the way they used to manage this was they needed all the fodder that was available to them, so they would feed it regardless of whether the animals approved or not. But they would typically start the winter feeding the least palatable when the animals were, if you like, in a condition to perhaps reject or tolerate it better. And they would save the better, the more palatable, the more nutritious plants for the end of the winter time, when the animals were needing to take on condition to go back out to grass again. But you can see here that as with most research on tree fodder, they've compared it to the feedstuffs that are available in the environment. So here it's meadow hay and red clover. And you can see that all of the trees compare very well indeed in terms of fat, sugar and protein content. So this is some more up-to-date research looking at crude protein levels, but also the nitrogen that's available to the animal, so the effective degradable nitrogen. And again, compared to alfalfa and ryegrass. So you can see whilst the alfalfa and ryegrass have fairly low crude protein, what protein that is there is very digestible. So most of that protein is available to the animal. So really the way to read this graph is that the more you go to the top right-hand corner, the better the protein, both the content and the availability for the animal. And you can see that mulberry is an absolute standout protein source. But other trees compare pretty well with the alfalfa and the ryegrass. The things that the tree leaves have compared to these grasses is that they also contain condensed tannins, as do many forbs. But we used to think that condensed tannins, as all tannins, were anti-nutritional factors, which they are. But we've recently learned that an element of these condensed tannins in the diet are really quite beneficial. So the condensed tannins bind onto the protein and prevent the protein being broken down in the rumen. But when they hit the more acidic abomasum, that breaks the bond. So it's effectively delivering high quality rumen bypass protein. So really, you know, this is, at least in dairy farming, this is the holy grail. And there is a lot of research that's being carried out now, both in Ireland and Reading, for example. So Queen's University in Belfast and at Reading University, really looking at the potential for condensed tannins coming from tree fodder, and particularly willow. Another thing that the condensed tannins do is help to produce emissions. So methane, for example, from willow is around half that coming from alfalfa. And a small piece of research that was done in the last couple of years indicates that just feeding 200 grams of willow leaves to lambs can reduce the amount of nitrous oxide in urine. So there are lots of promising things coming from tree fodder. This is even more recent research, which ORC carried out with lots of other collaborators, including the Woodland Trust, Bangor, Reading, Nottingham, and GWCT. Now, this was some work that was done across 3 different sites in Berkshire, Leicestershire, and North Wales. And 3 different species were collected, samples from these. And these were oak, alder, and goat willow. And then we collected samples in both June and September. And then these were analysed. So here we've got crude protein. And I should say that one of the major focuses of this piece of work was looking at their value to sheep and growing lambs in particular. So the 2 lines across are the requirements for lambs. So the bold line is for 20 kilo lambs, which need to grow at 250 grams a day, and the dotted line, the dashed line, is 40 kilo lambs needing to grow at 150 grams a day. So you can see on the top graph, we've got oak from the different sites, and all of them at least are producing sufficient protein, or delivering sufficient protein for the bigger lamb to function well on. But you know, let's not forget that we're not asking these trees to be single source feeds. So even though we're looking at it from that angle, you wouldn't ask any of these trees to be a single source. The 3rd site had a second site attached to it, and there they collected some smaller samples from different species. So that here they've included sycamore, ash, beech, and chestnut. And again, you can see that there's plenty of protein for the older weaned lamb. Also note that the difference in protein content between June and September. So as the season is going on, there's less protein available. So this really matters in terms of harvest time. So here we have metabolizable energy, again with the same project, same criteria. And again, you can see that there's plenty of energy. But note that across the seasons, there's a slightly different story. So while some are lower in metabolizable energy, some have actually gained in energy. So there's something else that's going on here. And again, we looked at these samples, we looked at mineral content. And it's really quite clear that for some, so these are just 4 examples. I've got cobalt, selenium, iodine, and zinc that I've pulled up. And if we look, for example, at cobalt, so lambs that have been weaned coming onto grass, their cobalt needs are growing just as the levels of cobalt in the pasture are going down. So here there's a really great potential for including willow in their diet. Very good levels of cobalt. But notice also that there are differences in the trees. So whilst the willow is systematically high in cobalt and zinc, there are quite varied levels in selenium and iodine, and that also goes across the other species. So there's really quite a difference between season, site, and species. And it's quite interesting, if you look at iodine, the levels of iodine actually go up later in the year, as do some of the others, but it's not an absolute across species and across sites. So here's the whole list of the minerals that were analysed, and looking at species, time of year, and geographical location. So the way to read this is looking for significance. So the asterisks 1, 2, and 3 all indicate that there is significance, and the 3 asterisk is highly significant. So, for example, calcium is highly significant. The species is actually, all of them are significant. And if you look down that bottom list, it's actually the species that is the most important, if you like. when we start to combine the different things, the species and the geographical location have the biggest impact on levels of minerals in these trees. And I think what this shows us is that although there's a very, very strong narrative for feeding tree fodder, it often gets reduced to willow, because willow has a lot of good properties. So it's fast growing, it does have some very good elements, it is a good fodder, but it also shows that an enriched landscape with multi-species is the way to ensure that you really deliver as many nutrients as you possibly can from the landscape that you live in and that your animals are living in. So I mentioned about some of the minerals increasing over the season. And this is a piece of work that one of my earlier colleagues at ORC carried out, looking at feeding tree hay. So these samples were harvested at Elm Farm, and they were harvested in July and analysed at that point, and then they were stored until the following March as faggots of tree hay, and then fed to the animals at that point, and then at that point they were also analysed again. And it became very clear that all of the minerals, both macro and micro minerals, there was more of them in the stored samples than there were in the fresh samples. And it's not really clear why this has happened, but what it does indicate is that their value as a source of minerals increases over time. Now, that did a link here to a video where Ted Green is talking about tree hay. So it's about a 16-17 minute video on tree hay, but at the very end of it, he's feeding faggots of hay to animals, and these were the faggots that were collected for this particular piece of research. So it links very nicely to this work. But there are, of course, other benefits to feeding tree hay or indeed browse, and one of those elements is salicylic acid, which I think we're all familiar with as aspirin, painkiller. Of course, it has a lot more benefits than that. It does reduce pain, but it also has antimicrobial, antifungal, anti-inflammatory, antipyretic properties. So it really is a good all-round medicine. But again, you know, willow has a good reputation for this, but there are plenty of other plants that do have good salicin levels in them. And it's worth pointing out actually that all plants have salicylic acid because it has other functions in the plant, but particularly high levels in willow and also meadowsweet, for any who are interested in herbs alongside trees. So I found this list and I'm really annoyed with myself. I cannot find the reference to this list of salicylic acid content, but I put it up anyway because I find it very interesting, not least because good old goat willow is pretty good in terms of salicylic content. So you don't have to go to purple willow or violet willow to get that good medicine for stock. Yeah, so I mean, I know both of the farmers on the talk are going to talk about the practical elements, but there are some things to consider. So if we're thinking about offering fresh tree fodder, so in the form of browse, we need to think about access. So not just about the amount that's available to the number of animals that you have, but also in terms of physical access. So we think of browse height. So for cattle, that would be around 2 meters. For sheep, it's 1.2 meters. And for goats, it's non-existent. So we consider them to be vertical browsers. But even then, you know, these are maximum heights. So whilst an animal can access, so for example, the sheep in the top right-hand corner, that's around 1.2 meters. But look at how hard it's having to work to get access to that browse. And we had some short rotation coppice at Elm Farm, where the lambs, the weaned lambs, were allowed to go and graze and browse in this field. And I went out, so you can see on the bottom right hand corner, they're browsed pretty fully at that lower level. And I went out with a measuring stick to see just how high they were browsing up to, and that was 60 centimeters. And this is a relaxed body posture for these animals. So considering not just absolute heights, but comfortable heights for animals to browse at is worth thinking about. If we want to move into storing trees, then we have to exclude the animals in some way, either exclude them from the field or make sure that their browse is above access height. And typically, at least in the old-fashioned ways, we used to do this by pollarding or shredding, which is cleaning up the sides of a tree. And then, of course, we can feed it fresh. So, for example, in New Zealand, where they have very dry summers, they've been harvesting willow and poplar for feeding their animals in the summer. And it's a very, very important and useful source for them. Here, with the image here with the sheep, this is actually firewood. So this is a farmer who grows his own firewood. And when he drops branches, he lets the sheep clean them up to do the job for him. In the top left-hand corner, you've got some very old ash, pollarded ash for tree fodder in Sweden. And the outcome, you can see down below the tree hay. So there's a fresh trailer of tree hay in Shropshire. This is a dairy farmer in Shropshire, and this was his first harvest of tree hay. And in the bottom left-hand corner, this is also tree hay in Belgium, harvested for dairy goats. The challenge with tree hay is collecting enough of it and having enough space to harvest it and store it meaningfully. There are certain ways of doing it, and I'm sure the two farmers will come on to these. But I did want to really finish off with this trial that I'm taking part in a livestock project, which is looking at other ways of storing tree fodder, which will hopefully perhaps bring it up into the 21st century and make it available and useful at a bigger scale, perhaps. So here, I've decided this is a very ambitious project, I have to say, because I'm trying to look at 3 different levels. So we've got goat willow for lower level, lower scale farming, if you like, osier willow for medium, still on farm, and then looking at fast growing willow hybrids for off farm for wider use. And then there are 3 different trials. So we're using tree hay as the control, and then we're looking at pelleting it or chipping it, so to see what the difference is between pellet and chip, and then also looking at making silage. So then we are within the project, we're analysing it for its nutritional content, including minerals. We're including tannins and salicin for all of these different processes, and then also some emissions, so in vitro emissions. So across this, hopefully we will have a lot of information, and then over time I'll be also looking at storability, so including how much of the plant is lost during storage, and is there a loss of nutrients over time as well with these different processing methods. Hopefully there will be an awful lot to report back to you in the near future, but this is planned. So I'm planning the sample collection in July this year, and fingers crossed there's a lot to say and give back. Okay, thanks very much.
Thanks, Lindsay. We'll just book you in now for that next slot then.
Sure.
Thanks, Lindsay. That was great. That was so much information. We will move straight on now and hear from James at Tap North.
Hiya.
And hi there. I'm going to try and share my screen. I've just got like half a dozen photos that I'll just rotate in the background while you're chatting.
Yeah.
So
apologies,
yeah,
I've not managed to bring a presentation today. I had a few
okay.
problems over the last week, so that would be great just to have some images going around. It'd be interesting to see what you've chosen.
Yeah, I just need to find the right window now because I've got like 600 things open. I need to pick the right one. Right, let's see if this works.
Great. All right, well, yeah.
Okay, yeah, you just start talking and hopefully that'll just play in the background there. There we go.
Fascinating stuff from Lindsay. Really interested in the processing side of things, down to the, I'm sure a lot of you are already realizing that storing tree hay does take up quite a bit of space. So we're really interested to see what the outcome of that is. Yeah, I'll just give a bit of an intro to where we are and what we've been doing and how we are utilizing fodder and browse and tree hay. So I farm a very small piece of land, really, in the grand scheme of things with regards to farming, of about 8 acres below Tappanos Hill in northeast Scotland, in Aberdeenshire. There we go. There's an aerial shot, a drone shot of the majority of the farm. And I've been here since 2012. And since over those years, we've really been heavily focusing on planting trees. We've been earning a living through selling vegetables, so small scale market farming over the last 6 or 7 years. But in the background, we've always been aiming to get to the point where we're starting to focus more and more on perennial tree crops. This year, we're planting a lot more soft fruit and planting a lot of browse species for our livestock that we have. We've got a few dairy goats. There they are. We've just had some kids arrive over the last few days. We've had sheep in the past. We've also had some Shetland cows. We really got into looking into tree hay out of kind of necessity because we've got a lot of trees on the property. We're lucky enough that the previous owners planted a lot of deciduous trees, a lot of native species, broadleaf trees, and they're all, you know, a good 10 to 15 years old now. And with us planting all our other different trees for different reasons, whether that's for fuel wood or food, fruit trees, coppice, pollards, we're ending up getting a lot of prunings and having to make a lot of work to different hedges. There I am there, cutting down some trees. So yeah, we really came to tree hay the first time out of what are we going to do with all of this, all of these branches that we're accumulating. And we happened to have ruminants. So a friend came over and got us storing our first kind of cut branches. We experimented doing that outside under the shade of an ash tree. We cut some branches off an ash and tried just leaning it up against the tree, and that didn't really work too well. It just, the leaves all kind of fell off with the weather. So over the years, we've got a bit better at making bundles and storing them in the shed. So yeah, design is a big part of the layout of the farm. Permaculture design is our background, and utilizing agroforestry is a big passion of ours. So we've been consciously putting in different systems that are going to harvest tree hay. Sometimes it starts off as a hedge for creating fuel wood, for firewood, for heating our houses. And as a byproduct of that, we also get food for the goats. So we've, yeah, saying that, actually, we found that while we were planting sort of concentrated rows of fodder species and things that we can later cut as tree hay, in the fields, we've actually realized that we're also getting a huge amount to cut just from the hedgerows that we've used for stopping the wind, which we've got coming through the farm. We're at about 280 meters above sea level on a south-facing slope, so we're pretty exposed. So that's another reason why we've been planting so many trees. Some of the species that we've been working with, I mean, willow, which I know a lot of you have been obviously looking at. Willow gets talked about a lot, but it really is one of the goat's favorite species to eat. We've been planting a lot of hybrid willow, so it's incredibly fast growing. Kind of grows about 6 foot a year from a 1 foot cutting in the ground, planted at about this time of year. By the end of the season, it's 6 foot tall or so. Hybrid poplar, although that's not been so popular for the goats once it's been dried. Ash, I love ash. Hazel, we've been starting to pollard some of the apple trees that we've got, maybe the crab apples or vigorous varieties that we planted in the wrong place for fruiting, and decided to experiment with that. We've got black locusts growing on the farm, which we haven't yet tried as tree hay. And then some species like oak and chestnut we're pollarding to try that. So just lots of different experiments with lots of different species. Autumn olive, which is a nitrogen fixing shrub. We plant that a lot between our fruit trees as a nurse species, and they grow extremely fast. So we're constantly cutting those. They are very much enjoyed by the goats. And then looking into different herbs, we've got a lot of comfrey in the various gardens that we've got. So we've been drying comfrey and willow herb, of course, fireweed. That's another one that we've been bundling up and using. So looking into the medicinals, red raspberry. Yeah, there's really a lot that we've been working with. Yeah, and some of the findings that we've had, like I said, when I first started talking, storage is a big thing when we've been making these bundles. They're about, I don't know, about 3 or 4 foot long, some of the bundles of tree hay that we've been making. And I suppose we haven't made any more than about 40 bundles in 1 year, mostly because we haven't really got that much dry storage. There's a photo of us storing it in an old ruin that we've got on the farm. So they do end up getting quite big, quite long bundles. We just tie them together with baling twine mostly, because we still obviously buy in hay, and so we've got lots of baling twine. That's what we use for tying up the bundles. And we probably feed the ones that are on screen just there. We probably feed about one of those every couple of days to our goats, and we've only got two adult goats at the moment. And we've been cutting them in around August. I feel like we should really cut them a little bit earlier, but just by the time we get around to it, it's usually around August. But they seem to still be, the leaves still seem to be really nice and green. So they're cut in August and bundled up straight away, and then brought into a shed like this where we can get lots of air through it. You can see the bundles leaning against a slatted door, which is facing the wind, so they get a lot of air coming through. I remember when we first started making tree hay bundles, the idea of tightly bundling up fresh leaves, I was worried that we were going to get a lot of mold, but it really hasn't happened. In fact, when you open up a bundle, the inside of the bundle seems to be the best tree hay. It's still often really fresh looking and really green, and no sign of molds. Maybe get the occasional bloom of something on the outside if it's a bundle that's been left and forgotten about for a long time, but the inside is almost cured. So yeah, we really hope to focus on it a lot more in the future. We're running the market garden and all the various other enterprises that we've got on our small place. We're pretty busy, and yeah, every year we sort of hope to try and step it up a bit with the tree hay production, because for us it's just a no-brainer when we've got so many trees on the farm. and we can make tree hay a lot easier and more reliably than when making grass hay with the weather. It's something that we can really, yeah, it's a lot easier than certainly making grass hay. So yeah, I think I'm going to leave it there. Go over to Lynbreck.
Great, thanks, James. Right, let's see what we do. I don't think I've ever had 121 people in my living room before, but there you go. It's the first time for everything. Right, where is that? What's it doing? There we go. We good? Right, so I'm guessing you can see this, right? Unless anybody tells me not.
Yes, I can.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So welcome to Lynbreck, everybody. Thank you so much to Jay. Oh, we seeing? No, we seeing that?
I can still see the ones down the side.
But you can't see. Can you see this? Is that
you probably need to click on slideshow.
Right, let's try that. Slideshow from beginning. How about that?
It's doing something.
Just staying the same.
That's interesting, because I am definitely. But you can see. Can you see the main screen?
Yeah, we can see. Yeah, we can see the main screen. So
if I kind of click down like that, you can. Does that work?
Yeah.
Okay, let's just go with that. Let's just go with that.
Yeah.
Let's just go. Technology, so welcome to Lynbreck, everybody. I am going to try and give you a really quick summary as to why we love trees so much and why we feed them to our animals. So I just want to give you a quick background to Limbra Croft. So this is in this picture, you can see Limbra Croft. It's right in the middle of the picture, and right at the very back is the Cairngorm Mountains. So we're in an absolutely breathtakingly stunning location here in Speyside, but we're very exposed. So we're at the homestead itself is at 350 meters above sea level. We're facing due south, which is where all the weather comes from. We're at 57 degrees latitude, and we're on acidic soils. So really, in some respects, everything's kind of going against us. So we have to work with what we've got. And Lynbreck is owned by myself and my partner, Sandra. So this is me since about kind of 2008, 2009. I've worked with trees in some form, worked for the National Trust, planting trees, cutting down trees, surveying trees, worked as a tree planter for a while. So really trees have been a big part of my life. And the same with Sandra, who has been interested in forestry from a very young age, and then also spent time working with the National Trust and then as a tree planter as well. So we've always really had a real passion about trees. And I think probably what you'll get from the images that I'm showing you today is that Lynbreck is a very, very beautiful place. And with that beauty, as I say, comes a lot of exposure. And, you know, during the 8 years that we've been here, we've really experienced some quite extreme weather. Everything that they're saying is going to come, you know, the more the climate changes. So in the winter, you know, we've had periods where we've had up to 1 meter of snow, and with high winds that can, you know, cause really severe drifting. We get droughts as well. So this was back in 2018. These are some of our pigs who are in the field. And, you know, just quite a disturbing fact that I found out recently was that a couple of years ago, Nature Scot, who's the sort of the Scottish nature body, published that research that had been undertaken by the Environment Agency that said within the next 20 years, Scotland is going to have a 9-fold increase in the frequency of extreme droughts. So that's basically between now and actually 2040. So I just want to say that again. Between now and 2040, a 9-fold increase in extreme droughts, from 1 every 20 years to 1 every 3 years. So this is the very much new normal of what we're kind of going to be facing. So, you know, in the context of that, going forward, incorporating trees in every aspect of what we do here at Lynbreck is absolutely critical. And originally, you know, shelter was a big focus. So when we moved here, we looked up onto a large area of hill ground that we have, and we saw some pine regenerating, and we decided that we wanted to take that further and introduce native broadleaves. So we applied to the Forestry Commission for funding to plant a 12-hectare woodland, primarily of broadleaves. And so we went out, did the ground prep for planting 17,400 trees. This was back in 2017. This is us out with a brush cutter on the side of a hill, cutting 17,400 holes in the heather in which to plant little trees. And we only had 4 weeks to plant them in, and we planted them in every weather, from rain to, you know, sunshine to snow. But what we now have is this lovely flourishing woodland, and I think it's a nice, you know, important point to make, that this is what we did back in 2017. We weren't lucky like James and Rosa were at Tap Noth to move somewhere where there were lots of trees. There were some trees, but we got onto that straight away. But as I say, we do have some existing woodlands. We have about 3 hectares of existing woodlands, primarily birch with some eared willow and a little bit of alder. So we're focusing a lot on the health, on maintaining and increasing the health of these woodlands. So we're doing things like thinning some areas and replanting different species. So in this image, we've had to use protection because our biggest challenge is deer browsing in our area. This area isn't deer fenced. We've also been extending existing woodlands. So you can see the existing woodland down to the right. We've put a new fence in up to the left, and then we've planted in this beautiful area of bracken. So it's really rich soil, and we've put a lot of broadleaves in there. So we're extending our existing woodlands. And then we're also connecting our existing woodlands. So this is a shelter belt of 320 trees that we planted back in 2018. Interestingly, for this one, the ground prep was all done by pigs, which took the labour burden off us a little bit. And then we've also been planting hedgerows. So we've planted about 1.4 kilometres of hedging across the croft, mixture of kind of your classic hedging mix like hawthorn, blackthorn, but we've also planted a willow hedgerow in a particularly wet area that we hope in the future will be browse for the animals as well as shelter. But just bringing this back to tree hay, which is why we want to kind of talk what we want to talk about tonight. So as I say, we took Lynbreck on with an existing 3 hectares of existing woodland. We've since planted just over 30,000 trees across the croft, and that number is continuing to increase year on year. But the whole kind of idea of feeding trees to animals evolved. So we'd been moving our cows one day. So we've got a small fold of Highland cattle, and we'd moved them into a paddock. We kind of run a rotational kind of grazing system here. We put them into a paddock where there was a tree, and we noticed that they were really interested in browsing the tree leaves, and they weren't as interested on that particular day or that particular moment on browsing or grazing the grass beneath. And so we thought, right, so well, why are they doing that? And I mentioned it to a farmer friend, and who said, oh, well, maybe there's something lacking in your grass. And after getting quite defensive about the grass, I thought, no, hold on, what if I shift that and think that rather than it being something lacking in the grass, what if it's that there's something available in the tree that's not available in the grass? So that kind of got something going. I then started to think back many years to when I used to work in the south of England, and reference this guy. Now, Lindsay's already referenced this guy. This is Ted Green, the founder of the Ancient Tree Forum. Back when I lived down in the south of England, I used to hang out, very fortunate to hang out with Ted a lot. Great guy, truly rambunctious character, big personality, but real entrepreneurial thinking when it comes to trees. And Ted always used to bang on about tree hay, and I never really appreciated it at the time. But when I saw the cow grazing the tree, and then I just remembered about Ted talking about tree hay. And so we were quite in our early days at Lynbreck, so we started to kind of reach out to other people, and we were very fortunate to meet this wonderful lady who talked earlier tonight. This is the lovely Lindsay Whistance, and we've been so lucky, so privileged to have Lindsay visit us on a couple of times, and we've learned immense amounts of information from this lady. But what we really took from Lindsay was, while she's brilliant with her knowledge on the science and the research, she's really truly coming from an angle of trying to make it really good for the animals and really make it good for nature. So those are people that have really had a big influence on what it is that we're trying to do. So kind of moving it into the kind of the practical times, we then started to make our own tree hay. So how did we do that? Well, basically, you know, for us, when everybody's cutting the grass hay, we're out cutting tree hay. We choose a nice day. We're cutting, you know, the trees when the leaves are lush and green, and we basically work with what we've got. So we work with species that are in our area, which is primarily things like birch and willow, a little bit of alder, you know, occasional bits of rowan, occasional bits of ash, that kind of thing. And we make it into bundles, and it's a very simple system whereby we kind of basically, a bundle is about a size amount that you can kind of grab in your fist, and then we tighten that with a cable tie, and then we use a little bit of string to hang it in our barn. So this is it hung around the edge of the barn. We'd like to in the future, you know, the aspirations would be to, you know, use aerial storage as well, but we've got this great space above where we've got the cattle crush, so we're not needing it for hay storage, so we hang it in there. Some of the animals, as you can see, get a little bit impatient. So this is tree hay that's drying, so there's still plenty of fresh forage out there, but this is our matriarch cow Ronnie, who loves tree hay, so she can get a bit impatient, but it's nice to see that they're kind of interested in it. And whenever we were trying to figure out how to feed it, well, we didn't really know what to do. So we just kind of chucked it down on the ground. So this is in the winter, and this is the Highlanders kind of coming in for a sniff and thinking, you know, what's going on here. But it wasn't ideal because, you know, for any of you that keep cattle, you know that they like to kind of wrap their tongue around and rip. So they couldn't really make too much of this. So instead, what we decided to do was to just simply take the bundles that we'd made. You can see the cable tie at the top there, and then tied them to the fence. And then the animals come up and they've got something to pull on, something to tug on. And then they just simply rip it. And basically what you're more or less end up with is just little bundles of twigs. So it's something that you can just put out for them, and they'll come up and they'll work away at it through the day or a course of a number of days until you're left with twigs. And I guess the question is, you know, one of the points that that Lindsay raised earlier was about, you know, palatability. Like, do they actually want to eat this? Well, I think from this image, you can tell that they actually do. So I call this image last call for orders at the tree hay bar. So you've got tree hay lined all up along the fence, and the cows, they're just absolutely interested, absolutely wanting to eat it. And so we're completely convinced, so convinced that we've actually decided to plant crops of trees, for a better way of describing it, in kind of sort of compartments that eventually will be harvested as tree hay crops. So we've got 10 of these in what we call our lower field, which is an area where it's probably, to use farm speak, it's maybe described as sort of marginal land, unimproved land. And so we've created these 10 exclosures, and we've really densely planted within them. So it's mostly alder and willow because the ground's really wet and they grow really well. So that's what we've kind of made a step towards. So we estimate that with the 10 blocks, the aim is to harvest 2 a year, and then we've got a 5-year rotation. So what does all that look like in the whole? Well, this is Lynbreck. So the red outline is Lynbreck. The left rectangle is the area that we've put into new woodland. So that's about sort of 35-acre plot. To the right, the egg-shaped yellow shape, that is all in natural regeneration. So again, we're trying to extend that woodland and let it really flourish. So we've got nice shade, shelter, nice fresh forage. Then the yellow lines, they're hedgerows. or shelter belts. So they're a mixture of all native species, and they will again all be for shelter, shade and fresh browse. The little solid yellow blocks there are tree hay blocks. The blue areas, those are our new orchards. So they're not necessarily linked specifically to tree hay for this presentation, but we're starting to plant more orchards in our fields to really improve food production in a different way. And again, the red spots, we're starting to plant trees within our fields to be a standard. So we're getting more shade, shelter, and again, forage in these areas. So we've invested a lot into trees and future tree hay, and the question is, you know, is it worth it? You know, that's what everybody wants to know, because it's not just cows that like it, it's not just sheep, it's not just you know, horses. You know, poultry will love this stuff as well. And I guess the question is, yes, I definitely think it is. A couple of main reasons. One is you know, it's helping us give our animals a boost of something in the winter that they're not getting through their grass hay. We don't have any quantifiable figures, and at present it is just a supplement. But any savings that we can make on winter feed reduction is a massive bonus, and it's also a saving as a form of preventative medication. And you know, a second reason, you know, from a kind of more holistic kind of point of view is it is a nice summer job to do. So whenever you're kind of getting out and on a nice summer's day, you know, sometimes in our quest for efficiency, we become more rushed, we become a little bit hectic, but actually we reduce our efficiency. So it's really nice to have an opportunity to take time on the land, to slow down. And then as part of the feeding of the tree hay, you're taking time with the animals in the winter. So very much it's a part of what we would say is very much a part of, you know, work with what you've got. Trees grow here. The animals like to be in them. They like to eat them in the summer. We can see that from watching them. And it also makes our whole system much more climate and much more drought resilient. And I'm going to try and play this. We'll see. But, you know, one of the things that we think about often is, you know, work with what you've got, but also give them what you want. This is a nice little video of a cow just nibbling on some lichens as well. So maybe the next webinar could be lichen hay. But it just shows you that when you take the time to stand and observe them, they will tell you what it is that they want. So massive thank you from me. I hope that worked in the way that we kind of tried to wing it there. We did write a book a few years ago, and we wrote a whole chapter called "You Can't Eat Trees," and then spent the entire chapter talking about how you actually can eat trees, just not in the way that you think. And we also did a number of videos for the Soil Association a few years back, all on tree hay. So I'm sure the guys can share the links with those. So yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. That was awesome. Well, thank you to the three speakers. That was an incredible amount of information, and there's questions in the Q&A bit and the chat bit. So because we've got quite a big group of people still in the webinar, I'm just going to start going through the questions rather than let people kind of free for all shout in, because I think there'll be too many at once. And so I'll just kind of start going through those, and we might be okay for time. We'll see how we go. So when we get kind of closer to sort of 20 past, 25 past, we'll kind of get folk to shout out or flag the kind of burning questions if we haven't got through them all. And before we kind of open up the discussion and the questions as well, I'll say we will be sending round an email early next week with this recording and links to kind of YouTube videos that speakers have done, web links that anybody wants to share, and sort of extra links to sort of extra resources that we've got on our website as well. So if there's any sort of burning questions or kind of common themes that have come up in the chat that we didn't address, we'll kind of add those into the follow-up email as well, just in case we run out of time, because I think we're packing in a lot tonight in a short space of time. So I'll just kind of start from the first questions as they were asked earlier. So Julia Horner was asking about willow, and are there particular species of willow that ruminants particularly like to eat, and have particular willows been identified for anthelmintic effect or mineral content? You know, does it differ? So I'm not sure who wants to have a go at answering that one.
I can certainly take it for the mineral elements. So, I mean, we're still learning a lot, but trees have, let's say we can group trees into 3 different categories in terms of their succession or in terms of the way they function in the landscape. And actually not just trees, all plants. So they kind of sit in one of 3 groups. They're either accumulators, indicators, or excluders of different minerals. And they can sit in different groups for different minerals as well. So if we think of bioremediation, where we're using plants to soak up poisons in the landscape, if you like, heavy metals, willow is a very good accumulator of zinc. So in particular, osier willow, very, very good accumulator of zinc. Now that's been put to good practice in New Zealand, where they have facial eczema in their grasslands, and when the spores come out, the cattle get facial eczema, and there's nothing that can prevent it other than zinc. Like, it can't be cured once they've got it. So they've effectively poisoned their landscape with zinc until somebody realised that they could make these sort of hospital coppices where they put the cattle in and they're feeding on the willow. And they compared it to hay, which had zinc sprayed on it, or zinc that was put on the bases, and the willow worked much better. The zinc stayed in the animals' bodies for longer. So it really demonstrates how those kinds of properties can be utilised. Black willow is also a bioaccumulator of copper, but our understanding of this is still very limited. So I've had to go and read in bioremediation research to understand these things. In terms of fodder, there's still a lot we don't know. If I go back to the piece of research that we did, you know, there's still this relationship between tree species, where it's growing, and the time of year that you harvest, because sometimes the minerals, as we know about zinc, can move towards the leaf in the growing season and then move back towards the woody parts once the leaves are senescing. Still lots and lots to learn.
Thanks. I don't know if the other 2 want to add anything to that. Are either or both of you using willow?
Lynn, do you want to go first?
Like, who goes first? Who goes first? We do. I mean, we just use, you know, whatever we have available. So we've got some osier willow here that was planted by a previous owner, and there's obviously things like eared willow on the croft, which the cattle will browse on as well. Interestingly, we've never harvested eared willow for tree hay. That's maybe one for us to play around with, but yeah.
You know, goats aren't fussy. And that's so they are actually, they do turn their nose up at the hybrid poplar, and alder isn't that great, but with willow, I mean, like I said, with the hybrid willow is something that we looked into because we were planting it for fast growing screening and windbreak and fuel wood. So out of the hybrids, we've got Chinese willow, and then I think there's one Salix candida, I think it's called. I mean, they both love that. They really don't turn their noses up at any of the willow that we've got, including the goat willow and the white willow and things that we've got growing on the farm anyway.
Thanks. The next one, there's a couple of, I can sort of see some questions popping up, and I'm trying to kind of remember what they are, and then I'm kind of going up and down the list as well. But there's been a few questions about toxicity. And there's one here asking, are rowan berries poisonous for stock? But there's been a few questions about toxicity. So I wonder, the 2 farmers, if you have any species that you'd be kind of worried about feeding to your stock, or have you had any problems, or are there any species of tree that you deliberately wouldn't feed to your stock for that reason?
We're often told not to feed wilted cherry to the goats, and I guess the cows too, perhaps. So we've never done it. We've seen the goats eating cherry. We've fed the goats tons of rowan berries. Rosa dries them feeds them as a snack during milking, so that we've got something on hand to give them. We throw, just reach up and get the big, huge clusters of rowan berries and chuck them into their grazing, and they just eat them up off the ground. So we've never seen any problems with anything like that. Yeah, same with the comfrey. So mentioning the comfrey, I know that there is a bit of hesitance to eat lots of comfrey from people. Never seen any problems. Obviously, we're not scientists. We're not taking samples and checking to see, but we're just watching the animals and watching what they eat first. So I mean, comfrey is just enjoyed by pretty much every single animal that we've got, whether that's poultry or ruminants. So never seen any problem really from any of that.
I don't really have much more to add from what James said. I would have said the same thing. Cherry, I think Lindsay might know more about maybe kind of stone fruit species in general. I think like plum isn't maybe so ideal. But yeah, I'm not sure. And in terms of rowan berries, I mean, yeah, anything kind of low-hanging fruit in a near a chicken area, shredded, they just jump up and take them all, and they seem to be thriving on it. So
yeah, I mean, I see that Bill Grayson is on the his presence, and he and I have had quite a few chats about this, and I think we're largely in agreement that the richer the landscape, the more there is in the landscape, the more likely that animals will take what they need, and most plants can be browsed in certain amounts. So Bill often talks about his cattle browsing on yew, and whilst nobody could dream of recommending that you plant yew as a fodder source, wild deer also browse on yew to a certain degree, without taking apparent harm from it. In terms of cherry, yes, wilted cherry seems to be a real risk issue. But if you then look at North America, they have a lot of cherry, and animals are much more familiar with cherry. So some research that was done over there, or some observational work that was done over there, was when the branches are breaking in the woodlands, falling down, the cattle are going and browsing on the wilted cherry, but then they're going away and filling their gut up with grasses and other plants and going back and repeatedly returning to the wilted cherry. Ultimately, they've taken on enough poison that should have killed them, but they have strategies to manage those kinds of issues. And I guess that knowledge of the landscape, that nutritional wisdom, enables them to keep themselves safe. So it's really about amounts. Everything is a poison when you eat too much of it, I guess.
Thanks. And when you mentioned Bill Grayson there, his question is the next one that's sort of coming up on my screen here, about tree silage. And does tree silage include woody stems, or do the leaves have to be separated first?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the image I showed of silage, it actually genuinely is willow silage. There's a big trial going on in Denmark, so they are really keen on this. And this silage is harvested in June, so it's 4 months of growth. It's very new willow, so it includes the stems as well, but they've done this deliberately because it's for pigs. They really don't want rejection of woody stems for the pigs. The image that I showed is a ton of silage, so they are properly looking at big amounts. And I was talking to a researcher last week about this, and she said it was really beautiful stuff. So it's silaged very, very well. It smelled delicious, and the sows just got stuck into it. The silage that I mean to be doing, I'm going to be harvesting it in July, and I will be harvesting the woody components as well, down to around 8 millimeters to a centimeter diameter. So I'm basing that on the amount that the animals will willingly browse in a natural state, when they're familiar with browse, that is. I will be chopping it, But what I'm trying to do is to make it possible for it to be done on farm, because believe you me, the samples that I showed the results of earlier, having sat for days and days and days picking leaves off twigs, makes it an absolute non-starter in the practical world. So it has to be trialed with realism in mind.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks. Next question is from Alex, who's just moved on to a new croft and wondering about some species that are a good balance between nutritious and semi-quick growing. If anybody's got any suggestions for planting new trees on a croft.
Well, I'll just jump in there. I mean, the first thing that I would do is just have a look and see what's growing locally. So I imagine you'll probably get a good idea of what kind of pioneer species are growing locally. So, you know, for example, where we are, it's all about, you know, birch, rowan, if they can get away with the with the deer pressure. So that's what we primarily use as kind of tree hay, because that's what's readily available to us. But what we have planted in quite high density, quite high numbers, is willow. So goat willow, grey willow, and eared willow. So either in those kind of tree hay blocks or in what I call our edible hedgerow. And we have two types of edible hedgerows here. We have our kind of your classic edible hedgerow, which is your, you know, your hawthorn, blackthorn, a wee bit hazel, holly, that kind of thing, which the cows love to fresh browse in the summertime. And then our other edible hedgerow is our willow hedgerow, because it's planted in a very, very wet area. So that's our goat grey and eared willow. So that will hopefully grow up pretty quickly. And the other species, which again, I know it's sort of seen as being less palatable, but as Lindsay has very kindly pointed out, that palatability is not the hedonistic sense. So we've planted lots of alder as well. And we've noticed that even in our tree hay blocks, where we've planted blocks of alder that we'll harvest as tree hay, the cattle have enjoyed a bit of fresh browse on the edge as well. So yeah, that's the kind of things that we would go for.
Great. There's a couple of questions.
Can I just make one point here about
yeah, sure.
about food? So the fast growing plants, of course, they offer you food quickly and they regenerate very quickly. So there is a lot of interest. But I would just say that if you've got slower growing trees, so oak and trees like that, then there is also a rule of thumb to not defoliate beyond 50%. So you're ensuring that the tree has enough capacity to recover as well.
Thanks. I'm going to bundle a couple of questions together about bundles. And I think maybe for James, with the, I think it maybe came in when we were looking at the bundles drying there. Do you put different species of trees together in bundles? And there's a couple of questions about string or cable tie, whether there's, you know, what's the risk of animals eating or ingesting string or cable tie or ties in general. So it's kind of two questions bundled together.
Cool. Yeah, sometimes we've made bouquets of mixed tree hay, but mostly just for fun. Trying to give the goats some nice varied diet. On the whole, we work with like a hedge of mostly a single species, and we spend an afternoon or a day coppiting and cutting it down and bundling it up, so we end up with a kind of one species bundle. But no, I think it's a great idea to try and think about the nutritional needs and medicinal side of things for a bundle that's going to give them a bit of protein and repel some worms. And I mean, that'd be great to look into stuff like that. Yeah, we've never had, well, I've never seen a goat with a piece of baling twine coming out of its mouth after eating a bundle of tree hay, luckily. But something I forgot to mention is that we've experimented with using edible twine to bundle up the tree hay. So we've got a plant called New Zealand flax. What was that?
I said, what was it made of?
So we've got New Zealand flax on the property, which I forget the Latin, but it's a big frondy, spiky, palm-like plant, and you can peel strips off of these big tongue-like leaves, which are super strong. You can really pull on it, and we use it for if we want to go and tie something up quickly and we don't have a piece of baling twine in our back pocket. So we thought that would be fun to experiment with some of our bundles, and we tied it up. It lasts quite a long time before it decomposes. To be honest, I can't tell you whether I actually saw the goats eating it, but it was nice to know that it was a completely biodegradable package that we were leaving. So that's something that could be looked into.
That's great, thanks. There's an interesting question about any herbal knowledge for liver fluke. There's a reference to juniper, so I suppose that's maybe a more kind of broad question about liver fluke and herbal remedies for that, or treatments for that. But I kind of glanced at that and thought, oh, kind of tree species, for maybe drying up wet areas to reduce liver fluke risk. I don't know if that's a bit broader, if anybody has any thoughts on that.
I mean, trees for wet bits of ground would be.
I suppose.
Alder, we've planted coppice of alder specifically because we've got high water table areas and nothing much else will grow. So we've planted that, and the willow and aspen and all of the kind of wet loving trees, I guess.
There's a couple of people asking as well about gorse and broom. Has anybody got that on their holding, or do the animals browse it at all?
The goats love it. We're often feeding them broom. Certainly, they'll really choose a broom bush to stop when we're herding them around the woodland that we've got. They'll really enjoy eating every part of that, the flowers, everything else. And windmills were a big thing of the past. We've got archaeological evidence of a windmill being just down the road. We've got a grinding stone as part of some of our buildings here. So it was a huge part, wasn't it, of past way of feeding livestock on whin or gorse.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, it is an attractive feed source, but of course, it does require management. And of course, it is a nitrogen fixer, but it was a crop back in the day, so it's kind of been relegated to an unwanted plant. But maybe we should be looking. Well, no, maybe we should be looking at bringing these old plants back into use. Yeah, I mean, in terms of the parasites, there is a wider conversation, I guess, about that. Just the act of browsing takes them out of the risk zone of grazing parasites. And of course, on top of that, I didn't mention it earlier, but the condensed tannins also have a really good benefit for controlling parasite burdens. And there's an increasing amount of research on that sheep, for example, with a heavy worm burden, move their preferences for eating foods to high tannin plants, and they've been shown to reduce their worm burdens by 50% doing that. So both getting them out of the risk zone and enabling them to control it with high condensed tannins. Get a double whammy.
That sounds like a field lab, that one.
Yes.
I'm conscious that we're running out of time. There's a couple of questions. Oh, just pressed on something else there. A question from Clive Thomas for Lindsay, and we'll maybe have to leave it there and go to the last couple of questions for the Menti poll. So one from Clive that says, what's the hypothesis for chips versus pellet versus silage benefit?
Yeah, well, there's a bit of thinking that. So I was talking to a farmer, and it was his image of the fresh tree hay, and he'd stuck it on a trailer, and then because he'd harvested it quite late and there was some quite chunky wood, we were talking about waste and having to feed it and then clear up all the waste, the rejected stuff. And he decided I'm just going to chip it, chuck it on top of the silage and see what happens. And the cattle ate the whole lot. So then I was thinking, well, we could go down this route of pelleting, and it seems really attractive, not least because it will hold the leaf, hopefully hold the leaf in a more stable available food source. But what if chipping is just as good in terms of holding nutrients? What if nothing really changes? This farmer could quite easily carry on with the system that he's got without then having to bring in a whole other industry. So that's the reason for keeping chipping in the and then he and I carried on this conversation and thought, because at least most cattle farmers are making silage in some form, what about making your grass clamp but having a layer of tree silage just in the same clamp? And he was very interested in that. So yeah, I mean, if we're going to look at preserving it in one way, why not look at all common ways of preserving it and see how it pans out?
Yeah, that's great. Oh, thank you. Well, I think we're going to have to do the last couple of questions and then close there. It always flies by really quickly, but thank you so much again to the speakers, and apologies to anyone if we didn't get to all the questions. Jane, if you can share your screen again, and we'll do the last couple of Menti questions. So if you have a phone or are able to kind of toggle between screens on your computer and go to menti.com and put in the code that's at the top of the screen there just now that's showing, we'll do the last couple of questions. And when we do the follow-up email, we've got a kind of loose network, kind of agroforestry and farm woodland network, that has a WhatsApp group and a kind of Facebook chat. So we'll put details for that into that follow-up email for anybody that's interested in joining a kind of group that, you know, there can be ongoing discussion and knowledge exchange between people. So some of these questions could kind of roll over into ongoing chat if people are interested in doing that. So we'll make sure we include those details in the follow-up. And yeah, that's lovely to see that people are hearing about things that they might implement or do. And yeah, maybe some things to follow up. Might try chipping, feeding cuttings to poultry and pigs. Yeah, look like your hens were certainly enjoying it, Lynn. And if Menti is a challenge or a struggle, you can also just comment in the chat there. So I think we've got quite a few answers there. I'll give it another second, and then Jane, you can go to the last question. I think there's one more. And thank you very much to all the audience. It was quite a big group that we had. Oh yeah, so just any other general feedback. So yeah, if folk are interested in having a WhatsApp group or kind of chat threads within WhatsApp, I'm just kind of trying to learn how to get my head around that, where you have kind of topic groups for discussions, fire those ideas over. And while folk are putting that in, I'll just say thank you again to everybody for coming and to our speakers for speaking. And we'll put kind of links to useful information and references and follow-up stuff in our email that we send out next week. Lovely. Super. There's some more answers coming through there, but yeah, I think we'll kind of finish it there. We're done. I think we did not too bad. We're 3 minutes over time, but I think we packed in quite a lot in kind of 80 odd minutes that we had there. So, well done and thanks everybody, and have a nice rest of your evening. Right, Jane, you can just check to make sure that is the last question and there isn't like another random one that I've forgotten about. And then we can just finish it there. Oh yeah, thank you. Lovely. Thanks very much, everybody, and have a nice evening.